Mr. Geoff Cowling, gràcies per ser avui aquí amb nosaltres. Fa uns minuts que l'hem pogut escoltar dins de l'espai, la conversa que hem tingut amb la Fundació Catalunya Oberta, i el que més ens ha sorprès de tot el que vostè diu quan parla de la possibilitat que Escòcia sigui independent o que Catalunya sigui independent és el to. És la tranquil·litat amb la que vostè explica, no? L'energia, l'economia, això, allò, són challenges, no? Són reptes, poden ser dificultats. És a dir, aquest to natural davant d'un fet que a Catalunya ens il·lusiona, però ens inquieta a la vegada. Vostè ens ha dit en començar que té, evidentment, la seva pròpia opinió, que no té res a veure amb la de cap ministeri, amb la de cap govern britànic. Vostè què diria ara mateix? Com veu la situació, el to vital que es viu a Escòcia i a Catalunya davant d'aquests dos processos, no? 18 de setembre a Escòcia hi haurà el referèndum per votar sí o no a la independència, 9 de novembre a Catalunya, no sabem si podrem votar i en el supòsit que puguem votar no serà un referèndum, sinó simplement una consulta, com demanar una opinió no vinculant. Quin feeling, quina sensació hi ha a Escòcia i a Catalunya que vostè viu?
Well, obviously in the case of Scotland, Scotland has the right to decide.
Yes.
Because we do not have a written constitution. This means that politicians can take decisions now according to the challenges that confront them at that particular time. There is a realization in the United Kingdom that present-day political reality is perhaps more important than past legislation, because past legislation is obviously formed by politicians of the past who obviously had a limited vision of what might happen in the future. In this case, it is perfectly reasonable legally for a majority in Scotland, in this case through the vote of the Scottish Parliament, to decide that they wish to have a referendum on whether or not the Act of Union of 1707 should be repealed. That means abolished. Because prior to that, both Scotland and England had independent parliaments, and they decided in 1707 to unite them. So what can be united can also be divided if there is a majority wish by one side, and that may be the case in Scotland, depending on the result of the referendum.
I per als escocesos i fins i tot per als anglesos, entenen la situació del poble català en relació al govern espanyol? El senyor Rajoy no para, contínuament diu: tinc totes les maneres per impedir, per parar que es pugui fer la consulta del 9 de novembre. Vostès ho entenen? Entenen que això és democràtic?
Well, in the case of Spain, the fact is that Spain does have a constitution, United Kingdom, a written constitution. In the case of the United Kingdom, we do not. So obviously, in this case, the present government in Spain is quoting the constitution, which regards which defends the integrity of Spain, and therefore considers that any movement by one of the communities of Spain, of which Catalonia is by far the most important, that any move by them to have independence is illegal. Now, it is my view, personally, but it's only a personal view, is that after the Estatut, which recognise Catalunya as a nation.
Yes.
Then under various UN conventions, nations have rights, and nations have rights of self-determination. Now, if there is in my view, if there is a majority vote in the Catalan Parliament to decide to have a referendum in the same way that the Scottish Parliament has decided they wish to have a referendum, then it is better that that referendum takes place, or at least there is a negotiation with the central government in order to resolve the differences between that country, that nation, and the central government. Now, it's interesting that in Scotland, now that there are these opinion polls pointing to the possibility of a yes vote, that in the United Kingdom there's suddenly a move to offer more competencies to the Scottish Parliament. Now, that would seem to be something that the government in Madrid refuses to do, which I feel, and other people have told me here, is that could create a quite strong constitutional crisis here in Catalunya. Well, in Spain in general, because Catalunya is such an important part of
Spain.
Of Spain.
Mm-hmm.
So the differences are fundamental. The fact is that in Escòcia, in Scotland, the Scots have el dret de decidir. Here, the Catalans, according to the government in Madrid, say they do not.
D'acord. Tenint en compte la llei espanyola, no tenim a Catalunya el dret a decidir. Tenim el dret a decidir d'acord amb la llei catalana que farà el Parlament de Catalunya d'aquí a pocs dies. Però recordo fins i tot un article que vostè va escriure al Financial Times dient el que ara vostè recordava, no? L'Estatut fins i tot ho recull. Catalunya és una nació, les nacions tenen el dret a decidir, l'ONU ho sap. L'ONU avala. Ara, en la trobada que hem fet aquí amb la Fundació, vostè, no sé si era crític o aconsellava als polítics catalans que tinguin més relació amb les institucions internacionals. A vostè li sembla que des de la posició del govern català és necessari que hi hagi justament més suports que ens vinguin des de, no sé si a Europa, des de l'ONU? És factible pensar-ho quan, per exemple, la Unió Europea està organitzada en base als estats?
I'm not sure I quite understood that. Do I beg your pardon? Can you just...
Okay, it doesn't matter.
Okay, sorry. The question of whether or not the Catalan government can negotiate with other entities. I mean, it's quite clear, other international organizations or other countries, and it's quite clear from some of the comments that were made in today's lunch that the Spanish government is opposed to that and actually takes measures overseas to prevent Catalans meeting or talking to those people that they wish to. That, I have to say, is a surprise to me. I would find, I mean, for example, I believe that it would be very important for Catalan politicians, and in particular the president, because he carries most weight, to make some visits to other countries. Probably the first would be the United Kingdom, simply because there is a referendum taking place there now, and therefore it will be received with some comprehension and perhaps some sympathy. But it would be very appropriate for the President of Catalonia to go to London, for example, and use the offices of the Catalan delegations, which exist not just in London, but Paris, Rome, not Rome, I beg your pardon, Paris, Berlin, New York, London, that they would be able to facilitate a contact with leading opinion makers in the United Kingdom, and in particular via organisations like the Catalan observatories, where, for example, Paul Preston, a very noted
Paul Preston,
historian for Catalunya and Spain, runs something called the Catalan Observatory, which has been funded by the Catalan government, and that could provide a platform for a speech by the president to a very influential gathering of people in the United Kingdom. It would be a great surprise to me if the Spanish embassy, as has been suggested, might resist that. In the United Kingdom, our fundamental freedoms are freedom of speech and freedom of opinion. And I'm not sure that if there were attempts by the Spanish government to stop that, that will be well received in London. But, you know, the only thing you can do is to try.
No sé si vostè ha seguit que el govern espanyol, a través del seu Ministeri de Cultura, ha reconegut, they have recognized, directament, que han prohibit la presentació a Utrecht de la novel·la de Sánchez Pinyol 1714. És una novel·la, no és un relat històric, escrit originàriament en espanyol, que recrea els fets victus de 1714. Una novel·la que el mateix senyor Rajoy va dir que havia llegit i que li havia agradat, però ara ha prohibit la presentació. Vostè hi veu, vostè que ja era aquí el 1970, vostè va ser aquí, hi veu en la posició del govern espanyol tics, maneres de fer franquistes?
Oh, that's a very pointed question to make.
Esforç.
I do not know anything about this rejection of this novel, the 1714, I have to say. If it was the Institut Cervantes that refused to do it. Well, the only thing I can say is that Catalunya does have the Institut Ramon Llull, so that could be another platform to use. And okay, it may not take place in the building which is occupied by the Institut Cervantes in London. But I'm sure that the Catalan delegation could have the influence to use other places where that book could be presented, which is a way of getting round that.
I quina és la seva opinió, your view, d'aquestes prohibicions del govern espanyol?
As I said, I don't know this particular case, but I would consider that if there was an attempt within the shores of the United Kingdom to silence a Catalan voice, a voice of any region, anywhere, that would be quite outrageous, actually, and would be considered, frankly, Catalan has a human right, as it were, to express its opinion, and to deny that would not go down well in a lot of circles in Britain. I don't mean just left-wing, but it would be right-wing as well, because the freedom of speech is something which is absolutely fundamental to the British psyche.
Estem parlant amb el senyor Mr. Geoff Cowling, que havia estat cònsol del govern britànic a Catalunya als anys 2000. Vostè creu que per a Escòcia és convenient la independència?
It's not for me to say whether it's the right thing for them to do. I have to say that personally, that is,
Yes.
I would be very sad if Scotland decided to leave the United Kingdom.
Really?
Yes. I am completely in favour of their right to decide. But I have to say that all my professional life, I have worked for the British government. I have worked for the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. That I have worked in embassies overseas with a great number of Scots. I have never thought that you are English, you are Scots, you are Welsh, you are Irish. We have all been British. I should also say that, for example, when I was in Denmark,
Yes.
the ambassador was Scottish.
Yeah.
His number 2 was Scottish. My boss in the the councillor, he was Scottish. So on our national day, which is always the Queen's birthday, which we celebrated that,
Sí.
they would always appear in full Scottish regalia and kilts. And I thought that looked fantastic. I thought that is really what Britain is all about. So to lose that aspect of the United Kingdom, then I would be very sad indeed. But I can say that I had lunch very recently with that ambassador. He's now retired,
Yes.
and we discussed Scottish independence.
Yeah.
And he is Scottish to the core, but he is completely against the idea of independence.
Clar, senyor Cowling, sap què passa? Que per a nosaltres és un xoc, és una sorpresa que algú com vostè, no? Diríem que coneix tant tots els elements internacionals, les lleis, molts països, digui, estic a favor que vostès, els catalans o els escocesos, decideixin, i a mi em sentiria trist si els escocesos acabessin marxant de la Gran Bretanya, perquè aquesta opinió aquí no la sentim d'aquesta manera.
Well, the situation...
Mai, ningú, never.
Well, okay.
Never, nobody.
But that is my opinion. You asked me, and I too have the right to say that. In the case of Catalunya, it's very different. The history...
Why is different in the case of Catalonia?
History is totally different. Catalunya was 300 years ago, and you're going to be celebrating that very shortly, the 300th anniversary. It was taken over very violently by the rest of Spain. Catalunya does have its own identity, so do the Scots, but it has a different history entirely. The union between Scotland and England in 1707 took place voluntarily, and in that act of union, I could say that England too lost its independence.
Yes.
England does not have a parliament. England does not have an assembly like Northern Ireland or Wales, where issues of England are discussed at all. We are everybody discusses things in the Parliament in Westminster and may vote on them, and yet they have no influence. They will decide or could decide on issues which only affect England. So, we have been a family up until now, and it's that aspect which makes me sad.
And
also, I should say, of course, is that yes, it may be a vote in favour, but it will be a very narrow majority.
Very narrow majority.
Very, very narrow majority.
But majority.
It is a majority, but
Yes.
the first thing that Alex Salmond, if he is the Prime Minister, President, or whatever of Scotland, however he puts himself forward, will have to do would be to heal the rift in Scotland, because half or almost half of the people who will have voted against independence. So it's not an easy step to take.
I per Catalunya, vostè creu que ser independent és positiu?
Yes, it would be if the majority of people decide to vote in favour, if the vote is deemed to be legitimate, and I know that President Mas really would prefer to have a legitimate vote under the Constitution, then yes, it would be sensible for the people of Catalonia to have the right to decide. But there may be also people in Catalonia who feel that perhaps we don't want to be held back. They may regard it, people have said this to me, held back by history. They actually want to take the opportunities that exist in a very modern Catalunya, but to take them forward in Europe. Now, they don't want to go through the process of independence because they feel that the European Union already allows them to flourish. Now,
Avui al suplement a Catalunya Ràdio estem parlant amb el senyor Geoff Cowling, que ha estat cònsol del govern britànic a Catalunya. 9 de novembre. Pensem que el govern espanyol, un cop s'hagi aprovat la llei catalana que permet les consultes, enviarà la llei al Tribunal Constitucional espanyol i impedirà, farà legalment difícil que es pugui fer la consulta el 9 de novembre. Llei espanyola, govern espanyol, Tribunal Constitucional espanyol. En la seva opinió, què creu que ha de fer la població catalana i què creu que hauria de fer el govern català?
Sí,
Sí,
todo está en favor.
Sí.
Sí,
todo está en contra, against.
Todo está en contra.
En contra. The Spanish government is against the Catalan law.
Todo depende del pueblo de Catalunya. Todo depende también everything depends on
the Catalan people.
On the Catalan people
only.
through the parliament, their parliament.
The Catalan parliament.
And if the Catalan parliament would have the option, I guess, to decide, right, it is illegal to have a consultation, but the other option is open to them, is to say, fine, we will now have elections. Because the elections would be legitimate, and the elections might, I'm not saying they would, because everything depends upon the democratic vote of people, but that could very easily bring a big swing towards the very pro-Catalan political parties such as Esquerra Republicana. During my time, when I was in Consul General and I had meetings with Josep Luis Carod Rovira, it was a very small party, but it has grown. At this moment. But it has grown enormously. It could grow further if that's where the protest vote comes to. Now, at that point, of course, if you have someone like Oriol Junqueras who only wants independence, then you have obviously a big constitutional crisis with the rest of Spain if Rajoy refuses to. He would have to recognize the vote in the Catalan Parliament, because that is legitimate.
Això vol dir una declaració unilateral d'independència al Parlament?
That takes you into totally different territory. If you have a unilateral declaration of independence, as I said in my talk, the only thing that one's got to look at then is how would the government of Madrid, in the government of the rest of Spain, react. We have experience of when the government of Spain gets angry, then it will decide to block off Gibraltar. It does so very aggressively, without any regard to the people of Gibraltar, without any regard either to the many Spaniards who actually work in Gibraltar, who find it difficult to get to and from work, but nonetheless they make political action. So I don't know what they would do. There is one thing that does concern me. Some time ago, talking to other British ambassadors who have served in Madrid, they said you should always remember there are some very hard men in Madrid. And this is and you have to remember, of course, that those members of the armed forces, one of whom I believe said that la patria es más importante la democracia and received applause for it, they would have been trained as young cadets in Franco's army. And for them, the concept of democracy may not be as deeply rooted in their psyche as it would be, let's say, in the armed forces in the United Kingdom.
Acabo. Senyor Cowling, la reina de Queen Elizabeth ha dit que estaria orgullosa de ser també la reina de la gent, del poble escocès independent. Sincerament, no sé si estaria gaire contenta o estaria set com vostè.
The one thing you should say is that the Queen has said absolutely nothing. There is a lot of speculation.
Salmon said. Alex Salmon said that the Queen Elizabeth said that she will be satisfied to be the Queen of Scottish people.
Because she is the Queen, yes. Well, I don't
Salmon
know if she
said
that.
Yes,
he may have said that.
Last Tuesday.
But there is no... The referendum is not about the Union of Crowns of 1603. It's about the political union of 1707. The fact is that in 1603, and I'm speaking as English now, had to import a Scottish king to be King of England because Queen Elizabeth did not have any children. So that is a very strong Scottish link that already England has. But there's a lot of speculation in the press as to what the Queen might or might not think. But the plain fact is this is not an issue concerning the monarchy in the United Kingdom.
I acabem, senyor Cowling, a la xerrada, la lecture que ens ha fet vostè. Com ho diu allò? Be careful with what?
Be careful with what you wish for.
Why?
It's just an expression that we have.
Oh, and the meaning is terrible.
Well, yeah, okay, it's all right. It's just be careful what you wish for. Just think about what is beyond. It's a very emotional time for Scotland. It's a very emotional time for Catalunya. But the world is a challenging place.
Yes.
A very challenging place. And not everything is always in a country's favour. I mean, for example, look at what's happening in Russia today at the moment and is happening with the Ukraine. Look at what the Baltic states are very concerned about, the fact they have come off from the Soviet Union, and NATO is now sending forces into Poland, etc., as a kind of signal. This is not... The world moves on all the time, and not everything is in a very friendly environment. That is all I am saying. And as I mentioned in my talk, we know, because the RAF has intercepted various Russian reconnaissance aircraft, which have been probing the British northern, in other words, north of Scotland, air defences, and sending Russian ships very close to the shores of the United Kingdom. So this is something which hasn't happened before. So Scotland might suddenly find that if it is independent, that other countries will probe its weak spots and its resolve to remain independent.
Senyor Cowling, moltíssimes gràcies pel seu temps, és molt amable de part seva, però afortunadament, i vostè que coneix el poble català, ara li explicaré, som gent pacífica, tenim la rauxa, no sé, però tenim el seny. Ara li explico en anglès. Gràcies, thank you very much.
Moltes gràcies.